The wind howled like a demon possessed as Zelda Warren stumbled through the knee-deep snow, her wrists bound with rope so tight it had long since cut off most feeling in her hands. She could barely see 3 feet ahead through the whirling white chaos of the blizzard that had descended upon the Arizona high country with unexpected fury in late December of 1884, and every labored breath she took felt like daggers of ice piercing her lungs. Behind her, she could hear the gruff voices of the men who had taken her from the burned remains of her family's ranch 2 weeks ago, their laughter cutting through the storm as they discussed what price she might fetch at the mining camp ahead. She had stopped crying days ago. There were no tears left, no hope remaining in her heart after watching her parents die in the fire that had consumed everything she had ever known. The outlaws had come in the night, taking what they wanted and leaving destruction in their wake. Zelda, at 19 years old, had been their final prize, and now they were dragging her north through this unseasonable storm to sell her to the highest bidder at a rough mining settlement near Flagstaff. Her dark hair hung in matted tangles around her face, and her thin dress offered no protection against the bitter cold that seemed determined to claim her life before they even reached their destination. "Keep moving, girl," one of the men snarled, giving her a sharp push that sent her sprawling face first into the snow. She tasted blood and ice as she struggled to rise without the use of her hands, her body shaking so violently she could barely control her limbs. The mining camp materialized out of the blizzard like a phantom settlement, crude buildings barely visible through the sheets of falling snow. Zelda could hear the sounds of men shouting, dogs barking, and somewhere in the distance, the rhythmic pounding of machinery that never seemed to rest. Her captors hauled her to her feet and dragged her toward what appeared to be a large tent with lamplight glowing from within. Inside, the warmth hit her like a physical force, though it brought more pain than comfort as sensation began returning to her frozen limbs. Dozens of rough-looking men crowded the space, their faces hardened by harsh labor and harder living. The air stank of unwashed bodies, tobacco, and whiskey. Zelda swayed on her feet, barely able to stand as her captors positioned her in the center of the tent, while one of them began calling out to the assembled miners. "Gentlemen, we have here a fine young woman, healthy and strong, ready for cooking, cleaning, and whatever else a man might need in this God-forsaken wilderness," the leader of her captors announced, his voice carrying over the sudden hush that had fallen over the crowd. "Bidding starts at $20. Zelda felt her stomach twist with revulsion and terror as the men began shouting out prices, their eyes roaming over her with undisguised hunger. She wanted to scream, to fight, to do anything but stand there like livestock at auction, but her body had reached its limits. Her vision began to blur at the edges, and she wondered distantly if freezing to death in the snow might have been preferable to whatever fate awaited her here. $100. The voice that cut through the chaos was deep and calm, carrying an authority that seemed to silence the entire tent. Zelda's eyes struggled to focus on the speaker, making out only a tall figure standing near the back of the crowd. 100. The outlaw leader sounded stunned. "Well now, that is a generous offer, friend. Anyone care to top it?" The tent remained silent. Zelda watched as the crowd parted, allowing the man who had bid to approach. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat and sturdy boots, and there was something in his bearing that spoke of quiet confidence rather than the desperate roughness of the miners surrounding them. "Cash or gold?" the outlaw asked greedily. "Gold," the man replied, reaching into his coat to produce a leather pouch. He counted out the amount with careful precision, his movements deliberate and controlled. Throughout the transaction, his eyes kept returning to Zelda's face, though she could not read the expression in them. When the exchange was complete, the outlaw cut the ropes binding Zelda's wrists and gave her a shove toward her new owner. She stumbled, and suddenly strong hands caught her before she could fall. The man steadied her carefully, his touch surprisingly gentle despite the calluses she could feel even through her thin sleeves. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly. Zelda tried to answer, but no sound emerged from her throat. She managed a small nod, though in truth she was not certain her legs would support her much longer. The man seemed to sense this, because he shrugged out of his heavy coat and draped it around her shoulders before grasping her elbow to guide her toward the tent's exit. The blizzard hit them with renewed force as they stepped outside, and Zelda would have fallen if not for the firm support of the man beside her. He led her through the storm to a small cabin set apart from the main cluster of buildings, and once inside, he quickly set about building up the fire in the stone hearth that dominated one wall. Zelda stood shivering just inside the door, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She had been sold like a piece of property to a complete stranger, and now she was alone with him in his cabin while a blizzard raged outside. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she had nowhere to go and no strength left to attempt an escape. "Sit down before you fall down," the man said, gesturing toward a chair near the fire. When she did not move, he added more gently, "I am not going to hurt you. My name is James Irving. What is yours?" "Zelda," she managed to whisper, her voice hoarse and broken. "Zelda Warren." "Well, Miss Warren, you look like you have not eaten in days, and you are half frozen besides. I am going to make some coffee and heat up some stew. Then we can talk about what happens next." He moved to the small stove in the corner of the cabin and began working with the efficient movements of someone accustomed to taking care of himself. Zelda finally made her way to the chair and sank into it, pulling his coat more tightly around her shoulders. The cabin was small but well-maintained, with a neatly made bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, shelves holding supplies and books, and little else. It was the home of a man who lived alone and preferred order to chaos. As the coffee began to percolate, and the smell of heating stew filled the cabin, Zelda felt the first stirrings of awareness beyond her immediate survival. This man had just paid a small fortune for her, yet he was treating her with a courtesy that seemed at odds with everything she had experienced over the past 2 weeks. She studied him cautiously as he worked, noting the lean strength in his frame, the competent way he moved, and the lack of threat in his demeanor. "Here," James said, bringing her a cup of hot coffee and a bowl of stew with a chunk of bread balanced on the rim. "Eat slowly. Your stomach will not appreciate too much at once if you have been starving." The food was simple but good, and Zelda forced herself to follow his advice despite the hunger that roared to life at the first taste. She ate in silence while James settled into the other chair with his own meal, giving her space and time to gather herself. When she had finished, he took the empty bowl and refilled it without comment. Only after she had eaten a second, smaller portion did he finally speak again. "I am going to be direct with you, Miss Warren, because I think you have earned honesty after whatever hell you have been through," James said, his gray eyes meeting hers steadily. "I did not buy you because I need a slave or a woman to warm my bed. I bought you because leaving you to that crowd would have been a death sentence, and I could not stand by and let that happen." Zelda stared at him, confusion warring with cautious hope. "I do not understand. You paid $100 in gold." "I know what I paid." He leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I work as a foreman for the Silver Bell Mining Company. I make decent wages, and I have been saving for a long time to buy some land and start a ranch down near Apache Junction. That money was most of what I had saved, but it seemed a fair trade for a human life. But why? Zelda asked, her voice breaking. You do not know me. You owe me nothing. James was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, there was a weight of old pain in his words. 5 years ago, I had a sister named Sarah. She was 17 when raiders attacked our family's homestead in Texas. They killed my parents and took Sarah. By the time I tracked them down, they had sold her to a brothel in San Antonio. I found her, but she was so broken by what had been done to her that she took her own life 3 months later. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to prevent that kind of fate for someone else, I would take it, no matter the cost. Tears that Zelda thought had been exhausted days ago suddenly burned in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. I am sorry, she whispered. I am so sorry about your sister. Thank you, James said quietly. Now, as for what happens next, that is up to you. This blizzard will probably last another day or two. Once it clears, I can take you to Flagstaff proper and help you contact any family you might have, or I can help you get passage to wherever you want to go. If you have nowhere to go and no one to turn to, you are welcome to stay here until you figure out your next step. The choice is yours, Miss Warren. You are not my property and you never will be. Zelda sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb the gift he had just given her. Freedom, choice, hope. Things she had thought lost forever when the outlaws had dragged her from her burning home. I have no family left, she said finally, her voice barely audible over the howling wind outside. The men who sold me killed my parents. Our ranch is gone. Everything is gone. Then you will stay here until the storm passes, and we will figure out the rest together, James said firmly. He stood and moved to a trunk against the wall, pulling out some folded clothes. These were my sisters. I could never bring myself to get rid of them, but I think she would be happy to know they are being put to good use. There is a screen in the corner for privacy. Get out of that wet dress before you catch your death and get some sleep. You can take the bed. I will make a pallet by the fire. I cannot take your bed, Zelda protested weakly. You can and you will, James replied, his tone brooking no argument. You are exhausted and half dead from cold and hunger. I will be fine by the fire. Now go on. Too tired to argue further, Zelda took the clothes and retreated behind the screen. The dress was warm wool, well made and only slightly too large for her frame. There was also a clean shift, thick stockings, and even a warm shawl. As she changed out of her tattered, frozen clothes, she felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time since the night of the fire, she felt like a person again rather than a thing to be used and discarded. When she emerged from behind the screen, James had already made up a bedroll near the hearth and was banking the fire for the night. He glanced up at her, and something flickered in his eyes before he looked away. The bed is all yours, Miss Warren. If you need anything in the night, do not hesitate to wake me. Zelda climbed into the bed, which still held the faint scent of James, a mixture of wood smoke, leather, and something else she could not quite name. The blankets were warm and heavy, and the mattress was stuffed with straw that crackled softly as she settled into it. She should have fallen asleep immediately, but instead she found herself staring at the ceiling, watching the firelight dance across the rough wooden beams. "Mr. Irving," she said softly into the darkness. "Yes, Miss Warren. Thank you for everything." There was a pause before he answered, his voice warm despite its quietness. "You are welcome. Now get some sleep." The blizzard raged for 3 full days, trapping them inside the small cabin with nothing but each other for company. At first, Zelda was nervous and uncertain, jumping at every sound and watching James with wary eyes. But as the hours passed and he continued to treat her with unfailing courtesy and respect, she began to relax. James, she discovered, was a man of many layers. He was well-read, with a collection of books that ranged from practical guides to farming and animal husbandry, to novels by authors she had only heard her mother mention in passing. He spent his mornings reading or writing in a journal he kept, and his afternoons working on various small projects around the cabin, always careful to give Zelda space and never crowding her. For her part, Zelda found herself drawn into conversations with an ease that surprised her. James was an attentive listener, and when she finally found the courage to tell him about her parents and the ranch they had worked so hard to build, he listened with genuine compassion. He did not offer empty platitudes or try to minimize her pain. He simply listened and let her grieve. "They came for our horses," she told him on the second day, staring into the fire as the memories washed over her. "We had a small herd of really good breeding stock, and my father had a reputation for training the best horses in the territory. The outlaws wanted them, but my father refused to hand them over, so they killed him right there in the yard, and when my mother screamed, they shot her too. Then they set fire to everything." "How did you survive?" James asked gently. "I was in the root cellar getting supplies for dinner. I heard the shots and hid, but they found me when they were searching the property. Their leader said I was too pretty to waste, and that they could get good money for me up north." Zelda wrapped her arms around herself, still feeling the phantom grip of rough hands dragging her from her hiding place. "I tried to fight them, but there were too many." James's jaw tightened, and she saw his hands curl into fists before he deliberately relaxed them. "Those men should hang for what they did to you and your family. When we get to Flagstaff, we can report them to the marshal. Maybe something can be done." "Maybe," Zelda said, though she had little faith in frontier justice. The men who had destroyed her life were probably long gone, spending their gold and celebrating their successful raid. Still, James's willingness to pursue justice on her behalf warmed something in her chest that had been cold for a very long time. On the third day of the blizzard, Zelda woke to find James preparing an elaborate breakfast of eggs, bacon, flapjacks, and fresh coffee. "What is the occasion?" she asked, surprised by the spread. "The storm is breaking," James replied, gesturing toward the window where weak sunlight was beginning to filter through the clouds. "I figured we should celebrate surviving it with a proper meal. Plus, I have been eating bachelor food for so long I had forgotten how nice it is to cook for someone else." They ate together at the small table, and Zelda found herself studying James's face in the improved light. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, with strong features and a slight scar along his jawline that she had not noticed before. But it was his eyes that captivated her, those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul while holding secrets of their own. "What will you do now?" Zelda asked as they cleaned up after the meal. "Will you stay with the mining company?" James shook his head. "I have already given my notice. I was planning to leave at the end of the month anyway. This country is too cold and too rough for my taste. I want to head south to Apache Junction and use what money I have left to buy some land. There is good grazing down there, and water rights can still be had for reasonable prices. I want to raise horses and cattle, build something lasting." "That sounds wonderful," Zelda said wistfully, thinking of her parents' dreams that had died with them. "Come with me," James said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise him as much as they surprised her. Zelda stared at him. "What?" "Come with me to Apache Junction," James repeated, his voice growing more certain. "I know we have only known each other a few days, and I am not suggesting anything improper, but you said yourself you have nowhere to go and no family left. I could use a partner in this venture, someone who knows horses and ranching. We could build something together as business partners if nothing else." "You would trust me as a partner?" Zelda asked, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "I would," James said firmly. "You are smart, strong, and you know the ranching business. More than that, you have survived things that would have broken most people. That takes courage and determination, qualities I value highly in a partner." Zelda felt tears threatening again, but this time they were tears of hope rather than despair. "I do not have any money to contribute. You have knowledge and skills, which are worth far more than gold in this business," James countered. "Besides, I am the one who spent most of my savings on that mine camp auction. Seems only fair you help me rebuild my fortune." The hint of humor in his voice made her smile despite everything. "When would we leave?" "As soon as the roads are clear enough for travel, probably within the week." James paused, then added, "I want you to know that this offer comes with no strings attached, Miss Warren. I will help you establish your own household in Apache Junction if that is what you prefer, or we can work together as partners. Either way, you will have your freedom and your independence." "You have my word on that." Looking into his honest gray eyes, Zelda realized she believed him completely. In the span of 3 days, this man had shown her more kindness and respect than she had known existed in the world. He had saved her life, given her hope, and now he was offering her a future. It was more than she had dreamed possible when she had been stumbling through that blizzard, resigned to whatever horrible fate awaited her. "I would like to be your partner," she said softly. "If you truly mean it." "I mean it," James assured her. He extended his hand across the table, and after a moment's hesitation, Zelda placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and firm, and she felt a strange flutter in her stomach at the contact. "Partners, then," she said. "Partners," James agreed, a slow smile spreading across his face that transformed his normally serious expression into something that made Zelda's breath catch in her throat. They spent the next 4 days preparing for the journey south. James finished his business with the mining company, collecting his final wages and selling off the items he did not need to take with him. Zelda helped him pack and organize supplies, grateful to have something productive to occupy her hands and mind. The foreman of the mine, a gruff man named Callahan, came by the cabin on their last evening to settle accounts. He looked at Zelda with frank curiosity, but said nothing about her presence until James invited him to sit for a drink. "So you are really leaving us, Irving," Callahan said, accepting a glass of whiskey. "Cannot say I blame you. This is harsh country, especially in winter, but you have been a good foreman, fair and honest. We will miss having you around." "I appreciate that, sir," James replied. "But it is time for me to pursue my own dreams rather than helping other men build theirs." Callahan nodded, then glanced at Zelda again. "Heard some talk about the circumstances of how you came to have a traveling companion. Wanted you to know that those men who were selling her lit out the morning after the auction. Seems they were afraid someone might ask questions about where they got their merchandise. Last I heard, they were headed toward New Mexico." James's expression darkened. "Did anyone think to inform the marshal? Not much law this far out, and folks around here do not like asking too many questions," Callahan said with a shrug. "But I did send word to Flagstaff about what I saw. If those men are wanted, maybe something will come of it." "Thank you for that," James said quietly. After Callahan left, Zelda found herself alone with James in the cabin for what would be their last night there. Tomorrow they would begin the long journey south to a new life in Apache Junction, and the weight of that impending change pressed down on her with unexpected force. "Are you having second thoughts?" James asked, watching her from where he sat reading by the fire. "No," Zelda said honestly. just thinking about how strange life can be. 3 weeks ago, I had a home and parents and a clear future ahead of me. Now everything has changed, and I am about to ride off into the desert with a man I barely know to start over completely. We could wait longer if you need more time, James offered. There is no rush. No, Zelda said again, more firmly this time. I think moving forward is better than standing still. Waiting will not bring my parents back or restore what was lost. I want to build something new, something that honors their memory by proving that I survived. James set his book aside and gave her his full attention. Your parents would be proud of you, Miss Warren. You have shown more courage in the past few weeks than most people manage in a lifetime. Please call me Zelda, she said. If we are to be partners, formality seems unnecessary. Zelda, James repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his deep voice. And you should call me James. James, she echoed, testing the familiarity. It felt right, like a small step toward the future they were building together. They left at first light the next morning, riding double on James's sturdy bay, gelding with their supplies packed on a mule he had purchased from the mining company. The journey south took them through spectacular country, from the snow-covered high country down through pine forests and red rock canyons, and finally into the vast desert landscape that surrounded Apache Junction. Along the way, they talked about everything and nothing. James told her about his childhood in Texas, about the brother who had died of fever when James was 12, and about his dreams for the ranch he wanted to build. Zelda shared memories of her parents, of learning to ride before she could walk and helping her father train horses from the time she was old enough to hold a rope. My mother used to say that I had horse sense, Zelda recalled with a bittersweet smile. She meant it as a compliment, but my father would laugh and say it meant I was stubborn as a mule and twice as hard-headed. James chuckled. Sounds like qualities that will serve you well in ranching. They spent their nights camped under the stars, always maintaining proper distance with James sleeping on one side of the fire and Zelda on the other. But despite the physical separation, Zelda felt an emotional closeness growing between them that both thrilled and frightened her. She found herself watching James when she thought he was not looking, admiring the competent way he handled the horses, the strength in his arms as he lifted heavy packs, the gentleness in his hands when he tended to a cut on her finger from a sharp branch. She was falling for him, she realized somewhere around the 5th day of travel. It was not the wild, passionate love she had read about in novels. It was something quieter and deeper, built on respect and shared purpose, and the kind of trust that could only come from weathering storms together. Apache Junction materialized out of the desert heat like a promise of civilization in the wilderness. The small town sat at the base of the Superstition Mountains, its buildings constructed of adobe and rough-hewn timber, bleached gray by the relentless sun. There was a main street with a general store, a saloon, a boarding house, and a few other establishments, with houses and smaller buildings scattered around the edges. James took them straight to the land office, where a weathered man named Fletcher greeted them with the weary courtesy of someone who had seen too many hopeful settlers come and go. "Looking to file a claim?" Fletcher asked, studying James with shrewd eyes. "Looking to purchase land if there is any available," James replied. "I need grazing land with water rights enough to support a horse and cattle operation." Fletcher pulled out a large map and spread it across his desk. "There is a section here, about 5 miles northeast of town. It borders Needle Canyon on one side, which means year-round water from the creek that runs through it. Previous owner gave up on it about 6 months back. Could not handle the isolation and the Apache threat. That threat is mostly past now, but the land is still available. 640 acres for $800, including the water rights. James studied the map carefully, then glanced at Zelda. "What do you think?" She leaned over the map, touched by the fact that he was consulting her on such a major decision. "If there is year-round water, that is invaluable. The location looks good too, close enough to town for supplies but far enough out for privacy and room to grow." "How is the grazing?" "Fair to good," Fletcher said. "Desert grass, some mesquite, palo verde. Not like the rich prairie land back east, but cattle and horses can do well here if managed properly. Previous owner left behind a small cabin and a corral, though they are probably in rough shape by now." "We will take it," James decided. "Can you draw up the papers today?" "For a cash buyer, I can have everything ready by this evening," Fletcher confirmed. They spent the rest of the day in town, purchasing supplies and equipment they would need for the ranch. James bought lumber for repairs, tools, seeds for a garden, and 2 good horses to add to their stock. Zelda contributed her knowledge of what they would need, and she noticed that James not only listened to her suggestions, but actively sought her input on every decision. As the sun began to set, they rode out to see their new property for the first time. The cabin Fletcher had mentioned was indeed in rough shape, with a sagging roof and gaps in the walls that would need to be chinked. But the bones of it were solid, and Zelda could see the potential hidden beneath the neglect. The corral was in better condition, and the creek that ran through Needle Canyon was everything Fletcher had promised. Clear water burbled over smooth stones, shaded by cottonwood trees that would provide relief from the brutal summer heat. There was even a natural pool deep enough for bathing, sheltered by rocks and vegetation. "It needs work," James said, standing beside Zelda as they surveyed their new home. "A lot of work. But it is ours," Zelda replied, and she realized as she spoke that she truly felt that way. This was not just James's ranch with her as a hired hand or a charity case. This was their shared venture, their combined future. "We can make it into something wonderful." James turned to look at her, and in the fading light, his eyes seemed to hold all the colors of the desert sunset. "I am glad you are here, Zelda. I do not think I could do this without you." "Yes, you could," she said honestly, "but I am glad you do not have to." They spent that first night in the cabin, working by lantern light to make it habitable. James patched the worst holes in the roof, while Zelda swept out years of accumulated dust and debris. They hung blankets to divide the single room into 2 sleeping areas, maintaining the propriety that James had insisted upon from the beginning. As Zelda lay on her bedroll that night, listening to the sounds of the desert and the soft breathing of James on the other side of the blanket divider, she felt something she had not experienced in a very long time: contentment. Yes, she still grieved for her parents. Yes, the trauma of her captivity and near sale into a fate worse than death still haunted her dreams. But here, in this rough cabin on the edge of civilization, she had found something precious. She had found hope, purpose, and the first stirrings of a love that might, with time and patience, grow into something extraordinary. The next weeks passed in a blur of hard work and steady progress. James proved to be tireless, rising before dawn and working until well after sunset to repair the cabin, expand the corral, and prepare the land for the livestock they planned to acquire. Zelda worked alongside him, her body remembering the rhythms of ranch life as she rebuilt her strength and confidence. They were never idle, but the work was satisfying in a way that Zelda had almost forgotten was possible. There was pride in standing back at the end of a long day and seeing tangible proof of their efforts. The cabin slowly transformed from a ruin into a home, with a solid roof, chinked walls, a functional stone fireplace, and even glass windows that James had hauled carefully from town. Inside, Zelda created order from chaos, building shelves, sewing curtains from fabric purchased at the general store, and establishing a kitchen area where she could prepare proper meals. She planted a garden near the creek, coaxing seeds into life with careful watering and protection from the harsh sun. She even found time to gather desert flowers and place them in a jar on the table, a small touch of beauty in their rough-hewn world. Through it all, Zelda and James grew closer. They developed an easy partnership, anticipating each other's needs and working together with increasing efficiency. But beyond the practical aspects of their relationship, there was something deeper developing. Zelda caught James watching her sometimes with an expression she could not quite read, and she knew her own eyes followed him more than was strictly necessary. One evening, about 6 weeks after their arrival in Apache Junction, they were sitting outside the cabin watching the sunset paint the Superstition Mountains in shades of gold and crimson. They had just finished a satisfying dinner, and the desert was beginning to cool after another scorching day. "I have been thinking," James said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "We need to talk about buying our first horses. I want to start small, maybe 6 or 8 good breeding mares and a quality stallion. We can build the herd gradually from there." "That is a solid plan," Zelda agreed. "Though finding a good stallion will be the challenge. We need one with excellent conformation and temperament. Too many breeders focus on speed or size and ignore disposition." "Your father taught you well," James observed with a smile. "He did," Zelda said softly. "He used to say that a good horse was worth its weight in gold, but a bad-tempered horse was not worth the bullet to shoot it." James laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Harsh but accurate. I was thinking we might travel to Tucson next month. There is a horse auction there that I have heard good things about. We could look for our foundation stock." "I would like that," Zelda said. Then, gathering her courage, she added, "James, can I ask you something? Anything? Why do you still have us sleeping in separate areas?" "I mean, I appreciate the propriety, but we are business partners living in close quarters. People in town must already be talking." James was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and intense. "Because I respect you too much to take advantage of the situation, Zelda. You came to me vulnerable and traumatized, and I will not be the kind of man who uses that for his own benefit. If something more than partnership is to develop between us, it needs to happen naturally, when you are ready and because you want it, not because you feel obligated or grateful." Zelda's heart swelled at his words. She had known James was an honorable man, but hearing him articulate the principles that guided his actions made her care for him all the more. "And if I said I was ready, if I said I wanted something more?" James turned to look at her, his gray eyes intense in the fading light. "Are you saying that, Zelda?" "I am saying that somewhere between that blizzard and now, I stopped seeing you as just my rescuer or my business partner," Zelda said, her pulse racing but her voice steady. "I see you as a man I admire, respect, and yes, care for deeply. I see you as someone I could love if you feel even a fraction of what I am beginning to feel." "A fraction," James repeated, and suddenly he was moving closer, his hand reaching up to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. "Zelda, I have been fighting what I feel for you since that first night in the mining camp. I told myself it was just protective instinct, that I saw you as another chance to save the sister I lost. But that was a lie. From the moment you looked at me with those beautiful eyes, exhausted and terrified but still fighting to stand tall, I was lost." "Then why did you fight it?" Zelda whispered, leaning into his touch. "Because I did not want you to feel pressured. Because you deserved time to heal. Because I needed to know that what you felt was real and not just gratitude or dependency." James's thumb stroked her cheekbone softly. But if you are telling me that what you feel is real, that you see me as more than just the man who bought your freedom, then I am done fighting. Kiss me, James, Zelda said, the words both a plea and a command. He did, leaning in slowly to give her time to change her mind, but Zelda met him halfway. Their lips came together softly at first, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened into something that made Zelda's entire body come alive. James kissed her with a passion tempered by tenderness, his hands cradling her face as if she were something precious and fragile. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zelda felt tears streaming down her face. But these were happy tears, tears of joy and relief and the overwhelming rightness of being held in the arms of a man who saw her as an equal, a partner, and someone worth cherishing. I love you, Zelda Warren, James said, his forehead resting against hers. I know it is fast, and I know we still have a lot to learn about each other, but I love you with everything I am. I love you too, James Irving, Zelda replied, her heart soaring. You gave me more than my freedom. You gave me back my life, my hope, and a future I can actually look forward to. I love you for that, and for 1,000 other reasons I am still discovering. They sat together under the desert stars, wrapped in each other's arms, and talked late into the night. They spoke of dreams and fears, of the ranch they were building and the life they wanted to create together. James told her about his plans to breed horses that would be renowned throughout the territory for their quality. Zelda shared her ideas for a garden that could provide fresh vegetables year-round and maybe even some fruit trees if they could coax them to grow in the desert soil. Eventually, James raised the topic that had been hovering unspoken between them. Zelda, I want to do this properly. I want to court you the right way, and when the time is right, I want to ask you to marry me, but I do not want to rush you or make you feel pressured. I do not feel rushed, Zelda assured him, but I appreciate your consideration. Let us take the time to build our ranch and our relationship together. When we are both ready, we will know. They maintained their separate sleeping arrangements, but everything else changed after that night. They held hands while walking to check on the horses. They stole kisses when the work allowed. They talked not just as partners, but as two people learning to navigate the complex and wonderful landscape of falling in love. The trip to Tucson a month later was both a business venture and a sort of courtship adventure. They traveled together, sharing the journey with an ease born of growing familiarity and deepening affection. In Tucson, they visited the horse auction and spent 2 full days evaluating the available stock. Zelda's expertise proved invaluable as she examined horses with a critical eye, assessing conformation, temperament, and potential. James watched her work with evident admiration, and more than once the sellers commented on how lucky he was to have such a knowledgeable partner. They ultimately selected 6 mares and 1 magnificent stallion, a 4-year-old bay with excellent bloodlines and a calm, intelligent disposition. The stallion, whom Zelda immediately named Copper for his burnished coat, would form the foundation of their breeding program. He is perfect, Zelda breathed, running her hands along the horse's powerful neck. Strong, sound, and smart, he will produce excellent foals. Then he is ours, James declared, negotiating a fair price with the seller. The journey back to Apache Junction with their new horses was slow but satisfying. They took their time, allowing the animals to adjust to their new owners and the harsh desert environment. Along the way, they camped under the stars, and one night James produced a small wooden box from his saddlebag. I had this made in Tucson, he said, opening the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring fashioned from silver and set with a small turquoise stone. I know we said we would wait, but I cannot wait any longer to ask. Zelda Warren, will you marry me? Will you be not just my partner in this ranch, but my partner in life? Zelda felt her breath catch as she looked from the ring to James's face, seeing all the love and hope written plainly in his expression. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, James, I will marry you. I would be honored and thrilled to be your wife." James slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that made her forget everything except the feel of his lips on hers, and the strong, steady beat of his heart against her chest. They returned to Apache Junction engaged, and the news spread through the small community with surprising speed. The townspeople, who had been cautiously curious about the young couple trying to make a go of ranching in the harsh desert, embraced them with warmth. The boarding house owner, a kind woman named Mrs. Fletcher who was married to the land agent, insisted on hosting an engagement party at her establishment. "You young people need proper celebrating," Mrs. Fletcher declared when they tried to politely decline. "Lord knows this town could use more occasions for joy and fewer occasions for mourning." The party was a simple but heartfelt affair, with most of the town turning out to wish them well. Zelda, who had felt like an outsider looking in for so long, was moved by the genuine kindness of the people who were becoming her community. They brought gifts of practical items for the ranch, shared advice and stories, and welcomed her and James into the fabric of Apache Junction society. The local minister, a circuit preacher named Reverend Thomas who visited once a month, offered to perform their wedding ceremony on his next visit. "I would be honored to join two young people so obviously in love and so committed to building a life together," he said warmly. They were married on a brilliant Saturday afternoon in late May of 1885, just 6 months after that fateful blizzard had brought them together. The ceremony took place outside the small church in Apache Junction, with the Superstition Mountains providing a spectacular backdrop and most of the town in attendance. Zelda wore a simple but pretty dress of pale blue cotton that Mrs. Fletcher had helped her sew. She carried a bouquet of desert wildflowers that James had picked for her that morning, his hands gentle and his eyes soft as he presented them to her. James wore his best suit, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothing, but his eyes never left Zelda's face throughout the ceremony. "Do you, James Irving, take this woman, Zelda Warren, to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do you part?" Reverend Thomas intoned. "I do," James said clearly, his voice ringing with conviction. "And do you, Zelda Warren, take this man, James Irving, to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do you part?" "I do," Zelda replied, her voice strong despite the tears of joy streaming down her face. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona and by Almighty God, I pronounce you husband and wife. James, you may kiss your bride." James did not need to be told twice. He pulled Zelda into his arms and kissed her soundly, to the cheers and applause of their assembled friends and neighbors. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and breathless, Zelda felt as though her heart might burst from happiness. The celebration that followed was joyful and lasted well into the evening, with food, music, and dancing in the street. But eventually, as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, James and Zelda slipped away, riding back to their ranch under the light of a rising moon. The cabin had been transformed in their absence. Mrs. Fletcher and some of the other women from town had decorated it with flowers and candles, and there was a new quilt on the bed that had been a wedding gift from the community. The blanket divider that had separated their sleeping areas for months was gone, and in its place was a single, welcoming space. "Finally," James said softly, pulling Zelda into his arms. "I have been dreaming of this moment since the night you first told me you loved me." "So have I," Zelda admitted, her hands sliding up his chest to link behind his neck. "Make me your wife in truth, James. I am ready." What followed was a night of tender passion and discovery as they came together as husband and wife for the first time. James was gentle and patient, taking his time to ensure Zelda's comfort and pleasure. For Zelda, who had feared she might carry the trauma of her near sale into this most intimate of moments, there was only joy and love and the exquisite rightness of being with the man she loved. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, James pressed a kiss to her forehead and murmured, "I love you, Mrs. Irving." "I love you too, Mr. Irving," Zelda replied, snuggling closer to his warmth. "Thank you for saving me, for believing in me, and for giving me a future I never dreamed possible." "You saved yourself, Zelda," James corrected gently. "You had the strength and courage to survive when everything was taken from you. I just gave you a safe place to land. Everything else, all of this, you built right alongside me." As Zelda drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she reflected on the strange and winding path that had brought her to this moment. The loss of her parents would always be a wound in her heart, and the trauma of her captivity would cast long shadows for years to come. But here, in this rough cabin on the edge of the Arizona desert, she had found something precious and rare. She had found love, purpose, and a partner who saw her as an equal. She had found a home. The years that followed were marked by hard work, steady growth, and deepening love. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, with Copper proving to be everything they had hoped for as a foundation stallion. His foals were highly sought after, and within 3 years, the Irving Ranch had gained a reputation for producing some of the finest horses in the territory. Zelda's skill with training became legendary in its own right. She had a gift for gentling even the most fractious horses, and ranchers from as far away as Tucson brought their problem animals to her for training. James supported her work wholeheartedly, proud of his wife's talent and happy to see her thriving. They built a new, larger house to replace the original cabin, with separate rooms for living, cooking, and sleeping, and a wide porch that offered shade during the brutal summer months. Zelda's garden flourished beyond her wildest expectations, providing fresh vegetables year-round and even supporting a small grove of fruit trees that she babied through the harsh conditions. In the fall of 1887, Zelda gave birth to their first child, a healthy boy they named Thomas after the minister who had married them. James proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband, rising in the night to walk with his crying son and changing diapers with the same competence he brought to every other task. Watching James cradle their son against his broad chest, singing softly to soothe the baby's fussing, Zelda felt her heart overflow with love. This was the future she had been given that terrible night in the blizzard. This was the life James had bought for her with his gold and his compassion. And she treasured every moment of it. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter they named Sarah, after James's lost sister. Zelda saw the tears in her husband's eyes as he held their baby girl for the first time, and she knew he was thinking of the sister who had not survived to see the happiness he had found. "She would have loved you," James whispered to Zelda as they gazed at their sleeping daughter. "And she would have been so proud to have this beautiful child carry her name." "I wish I could have known her," Zelda said softly. "But in a way, she is part of our story. If you had not lost her, you might not have been moved to save me that night." "I like to think she was watching over both of us," James replied, "guiding us to each other." As their children grew, Zelda and James made sure to tell them the story of how they had met, though they softened some of the harsher details until the children were old enough to understand. They wanted Thomas and Sarah to know that love could bloom even in the darkest circumstances, and that courage and compassion could change lives. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They added cattle to their operation, diversifying their income and making use of the abundant grazing land. James proved to have an excellent head for business, while Zelda's instincts about horse breeding and training were consistently proven right. Together, they built something that exceeded both their original dreams. Apache Junction grew as well, evolving from a rough frontier settlement into a proper town with a school, a church, and even a small hospital. Zelda and James became pillars of the community, respected for their hard work and known for their generosity. They helped new settlers get established, donated to worthy causes, and opened their home to neighbors in need. Through it all, their love deepened and matured. The passionate romance of their early days evolved into something richer and more complex, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared goals, and unwavering commitment. They weathered droughts and market downturns, celebrated successes and mourned losses, raised their children and watched their ranch flourish. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James surprised Zelda with a beautiful Arabian mare, a breed she had always admired but never thought to own. "I have been saving and planning this for 2 years," he admitted as Zelda ran her hands over the mare's sleek coat with awe. "I wanted to give you something special, something that represents how much you mean to me." "She is perfect," Zelda breathed, tears of joy filling her eyes. "James, you did not have to do this." "I know I did not have to," James said, pulling her into his arms. "I wanted to. You have given me everything, Zelda. A home, a family, a purpose. You took a broken man haunted by loss and gave him a reason to hope again. This mare is just a small token of my love and gratitude." "You saved my life," Zelda reminded him, as she had so many times over the years. "And you saved my soul," James replied, kissing her tenderly. "We saved each other, love. That is what makes this so perfect." As the years turned into decades, Zelda and James watched their children grow into capable, compassionate adults. Thomas inherited his father's business acumen and his mother's way with horses, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day operation of the ranch. Sarah, independent and spirited like her mother, became a teacher in Apache Junction, dedicated to educating the next generation. Both children married well, choosing partners who loved them and shared their values. And in time, Zelda and James were blessed with grandchildren who filled their lives with joy and laughter. The ranch that had started as a desperate gamble and a shared dream became a legacy, something that would endure long after they were gone. On a warm evening in the spring of 1910, Zelda and James sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the Superstition Mountains in familiar shades of gold and crimson. They were in their 50s now, their hair touched with gray and their faces marked by years of sun and wind. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had fallen in love while building a ranch in the desert. "You ever think about that blizzard?" Zelda asked, her hand clasped in James's weathered one. "About how different things could have been if you had not bid on me that night?" "Every day," James admitted. "I think about how close I came to walking away, to convincing myself that I could not afford the cost or that someone else would step up. And then I thank God that I found the courage to act." "I think about how close I came to giving up," Zelda confessed. "In those moments before they dragged me into that tent, I had resigned myself to death. I had no hope left, no will to fight. And then I heard your voice and something shifted inside me. "We were meant to find each other," James said with the certainty of someone who had spent decades proving that truth. "Everything that came before, all the pain and loss and struggle, it led us to that moment. And from that moment, we built this life." "A good life," Zelda agreed, looking out at the ranch they had created together. The corrals held dozens of beautiful horses, the fruits of their careful breeding program. The fields supported healthy cattle. The house stood solid and welcoming, filled with the laughter of grandchildren who visited often. And beyond the visible success, there was the legacy of love and partnership they had established, a model for their children and grandchildren to follow. "The best life," James corrected, bringing her hand to his lips for a gentle kiss. "Because I got to live it with you." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, just as they had on so many nights over the past 25 years, Zelda leaned her head on James's shoulder and reflected on the incredible journey they had shared. She had been sold in a blizzard with no hope, a young woman stripped of everything she had known and loved. But a cowboy had bought her and given her something far more precious than freedom. He had given her a future filled with love, purpose, and endless possibilities. And together, they had transformed that gift into something extraordinary. They had built not just a ranch but a home, not just a business but a legacy, not just a marriage but a love story that would be remembered long after they were gone. It was a story of survival and redemption, of courage and compassion, of two broken people who had found wholeness in each other's arms. Years continued to pass in their gentle rhythm, marked by the changing seasons and the steady work that ranch life demanded. Zelda and James grew old together, their love only deepening as the decades accumulated. They faced the challenges of aging with the same partnership that had defined their entire marriage, supporting each other through illness and infirmity with patience and grace. Thomas and his wife took over the primary operations of the ranch, but Zelda and James remained active as long as they were able. Zelda could still be found in the training corral into her 60s, working with young horses with hands that had lost none of their sensitivity, despite the arthritis that gnarled her fingers. James walked the property every morning, checking fences and water sources, his sharp eyes missing nothing despite the years. They celebrated their 30th, 40th, and finally their 50th wedding anniversary, each milestone a testament to the enduring power of the love they had forged in the crucible of hardship. The 50th anniversary was particularly grand, with children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren gathering at the ranch to honor the couple who had built such an extraordinary legacy. As Zelda stood beside James, surrounded by the fruits of their love and labor, she thought back to that terrified girl stumbling through the blizzard and could hardly believe the distance she had traveled. That girl had believed her life was over, that there was no future beyond the horror of being sold like cattle to brutal men. She had been broken, hopeless, and utterly alone, but she had survived. More than that, she had thrived. With James beside her, she had transformed tragedy into triumph, despair into hope, and darkness into light. Their love story was not a fairy tale with easy magic and instant happiness. It was something better, something real. It was the story of two people who had chosen each other, worked for each other, and built a life together brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. On a peaceful autumn morning in 1920, James passed away quietly in his sleep at the age of 64, his hand clasped in Zelda's as it had been for so many years. Zelda grieved deeply for the loss of her beloved husband, but she did not despair. She had been blessed with 35 years of marriage to a man who had loved her completely, respected her absolutely, and partnered with her in every sense of the word. She lived another 8 years, spending her remaining time with her children and grandchildren, tending her garden and working with the horses she had always loved. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch and remember the life she had shared with James, and her heart would fill with gratitude for the gift he had given her all those years ago in that blizzard. When Zelda finally passed in the spring of 1928, at the age of 63, she was buried beside James in the small cemetery on a hill overlooking their ranch. Their headstones were simple but meaningful, inscribed with their names, dates, and a single line that Thomas had chosen. Together they built a legacy of love. The ranch continued for generations, passed down through the Irving family, and remaining a testament to what two people could accomplish when they combined love with hard work and unwavering commitment. The story of Zelda and James became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of courage, compassion, and the transformative power of love. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all. Not the successful ranch or the valuable horses, or even the large and loving family, but the story itself. The story of a woman sold in a blizzard with no hope, and a cowboy who bought her and gave her a future. A story that proved love could bloom in the darkest places, that hope could survive the worst tragedies, and that two broken people could come together to create something whole, beautiful, and enduring. It was a story that deserved to be remembered, and it was. For generations to come, the descendants of Zelda Warren and James Irving would gather on the porch of the ranch house their ancestors had built, watching the sunset paint the Superstition Mountains in shades of gold and crimson, and they would tell the story of how it all began. They would speak of courage in the face of despair, of compassion in the midst of cruelty, and of love that conquered all obstacles to forge a legacy that would never be forgotten. And somewhere, perhaps in the stars that glittered above the Arizona desert, or in the gentle wind that rustled through the cottonwoods beside Needle Canyon Creek, the spirits of Zelda and James would smile. They would smile knowing that their love story had become immortal, a beacon of hope for all who heard it, proving that even in the darkest night of the soul, dawn would come. And with it, the promise of a future filled with love, purpose, and endless possibility.